Chapter 1. Unexpected Summons. Douglas Ellison sat in his architectural firm's corner office, reviewing blueprints for a downtown renovation project when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost declined it. Telemarketers had been relentless lately, but something made him answer. "Mr. Ellison, this is Principal Jarvis from Riverside Elementary. Your daughter hasn't been picked up. It's been 3 hours past dismissal." Doug's hand froze mid-signature. "I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. I don't have a daughter. I'm 28 and single." The woman's voice hardened. "Mr. Ellison, this isn't funny. Clara has been sitting here crying, waiting for someone to get her. If you don't come immediately, we're calling the police for child neglect." "Clara?" His mind raced through ex-girlfriends, one-night stands. Nothing. "I'm telling you, I don't know any Clara. Just come, now, or I'm making that call." The line went dead. Doug stared at his phone, confusion morphing into something else, a creeping unease that crawled up his spine. He grabbed his jacket and keys, his mind spinning. Was this some kind of scam? Identity theft? A sick prank? 20 minutes later, he walked through the elementary school's front doors, still half convinced this was elaborate fraud. The secretary pointed him toward the principal's office without a word, her expression tight with judgment. He pushed open the door and stopped cold. A little girl sat in an oversized chair, legs dangling, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit. She looked up when he entered, and Doug felt the world tilt beneath him. She had his eyes, the same unusual gray-green color his sister Louise always said made him look like a storm cloud. The same slightly crooked nose he'd inherited from his father, the same auburn hair that marked every Ellison for 3 generations. The girl's face was tear-stained and dirty, her clothes rumpled like she'd slept in them. A purple bruise shadowed her left arm. I don't understand," Doug whispered. Principal Jarvis stood, arms crossed. She was younger than he'd imagined, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that assessed him critically. "You're telling me you genuinely don't know Clara Ellison? She's been enrolled here for 2 years. You're listed as the father and emergency contact. That's impossible. I've never seen this child before in my life." But even as he said it, Doug couldn't look away from her face, his face somehow staring back at him. "Then we have a serious problem," the principal said, "because Clara's mother, Renee May, listed you on all the enrollment paperwork. You've apparently been responsible for this child since birth." Renee May? The name hit him like a freight train. 7 years ago. A whirlwind 3 months before she'd vanished without explanation. He tried to find her, worried something had happened, but her phone was disconnected, her apartment emptied. He'd eventually convinced himself she'd simply wanted out and moved on with his life. "Renee," he breathed. "We dated briefly, but..." He looked at the girl again. Clara. 6 years old, maybe 7. The timeline fit perfectly. "Clara," Principal Jarvis said gently, "is this man your daddy?" The girl looked at Doug with those heartbreaking storm cloud eyes and whispered, "Mommy says he doesn't want me. That's why he never comes." Doug felt something crack inside his chest. He knelt slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Hi, Clara. I'm Doug. And I promise you, I didn't know you existed. If I had known..." His throat closed. "The question now," the principal interrupted, "is where is Ms. May? This is the 3rd time this month Clara's been left here for hours. We've called the mother repeatedly. When we finally used the father's contact information, your information, we reached you." "Where does she think her mother is?" Doug asked. Principal Jarvis's expression darkened. "She says her mother is with Uncle Warner. She says they forget sometimes." "Forget their child?" Doug stood, anger flaring hot and sudden. "They forget? Mr. Ellison, I'm going to be frank. Clara comes to school hungry. Her clothes are often dirty. She falls asleep in class. I've been documenting concerns for months, but without evidence of immediate danger, CPS investigations take time." She paused. "But leaving a 6-year-old at school for 3 hours crosses a line. I'm required to make a report." Doug looked at Clara, his daughter apparently. and made a decision that would change everything. "Make your report," he said, "and give me Renee's current address. I'm going to get some answers." "I can't legally." "She put me on the emergency contact forms. That makes me responsible, right? So I need to know where my daughter lives." He let steel creep into his voice, the same tone that had closed million-dollar deals. Principal Jarvis studied him, then wrote an address on a sticky note. "CPS will be contacting you. In the meantime, I can't legally release Clara to someone who isn't. I'm on the paperwork as her father. You said so yourself." Doug crouched again by Clara. "Hey, would you like to get some dinner? Real food? Maybe ice cream?" For the first time, the girl's expression shifted. Hope flickered in those gray-green eyes. "Really? Really? And then we're going to figure this out together. Okay?" Clara nodded, clutching her rabbit tighter. As Doug took his daughter's small hand and walked out of that school, he didn't know the full story yet. Didn't know about Warner McCormick's gambling debts or Renee's prescription drug addiction. Didn't know they'd been collecting welfare benefits in his name for 6 years, or that Clara had been sleeping in closets while they entertained their addictions. But he would learn. And when he did, Doug Ellison was going to make them pay for every tear his daughter had cried, for every night she'd gone hungry, for every moment she'd believed her father didn't want her. Chapter 2. Pieces of Truth. Doug took Clara to a diner 3 blocks from the school, watching in horror as she devoured a cheeseburger and fries like she hadn't eaten in days, which, he suspected grimly, might be true. She was tiny for her age, thin in a way that spoke of chronic neglect rather than genetics. "So," he said carefully, "tell me about home, about your mom and Uncle Warner." Clara wiped ketchup from her mouth with the back of her hand. "Mommy's tired a lot. She sleeps in the day. Uncle Warner yells when I'm loud." She said it matter-of-factly, as if screaming adults were just weather patterns to be endured. "Does Uncle Warner live with you?" "Uh-huh. He came after Daddy left." She looked up at Doug with sudden anxiety. "You're my daddy, right? Mommy showed me pictures. She said you didn't want to be my daddy anymore." Doug's hands clenched under the table. "Clara, I want you to understand something really important. I didn't leave. I didn't even know you existed. Your mom never told me about you. Why not?" It was the simplest question with the most complicated answer. Why would Renee hide a pregnancy, disappear, and raise their child in apparent squalor while using his name on school paperwork? What possible reason? His phone buzzed. His sister Louise. "Where are you?" "We had dinner plans, remember?" Doug had completely forgotten. He texted back quickly. "Emergency. Need your help. Can you come to Harvey's Diner on 5th? Louise arrived 15 minutes later, freezing in the doorway when she saw Clara. His sister had the same Ellison features. She'd recognize them anywhere. "Doug." "What the hell?" "Louise. Meet Clara. My daughter." Apparently. His sister slid into the booth, eyes wide. "You're... Since when do you have a daughter?" "Since about 90 minutes ago." Doug explained quickly. The school's call, Renee's name, the emergency contact forms. Louise listened, her expression cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked like grief. "That means when Renee disappeared 7 years ago. She was pregnant." "Yeah." Doug watched Clara coloring on a kid's menu, trying to reconcile this small person with the complete upheaval of his reality. "Louise, what do I do? I can't take her back to that house. Not after what the principal said. Not after..." He gestured helplessly at Clara's bruised arm, her too thin frame. Louise reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "First, we get her cleaned up and fed. Then we call Morris Durham. He's a family lawyer. He handled my divorce, remember? He'll know what legal options you have. I don't even know if she's really mine. Shouldn't I get a paternity test first? Look at her, Doug. She's an Ellison through and through." Louise's voice softened. "But yes, get the test for legal reasons. In the meantime, we need to see where she's living." They drove to the address Principal Jarvis had provided, Clara falling asleep in the back seat with her rabbit. The neighborhood made Doug's stomach churn. Not the worst area in the city, but declining, with bars on windows and trash accumulating in corners. The apartment building was a 3-story walk-up with peeling paint and a broken security door. "Stay with Clara," Doug told Louise. "I'm going to knock." The apartment on the second floor had music thumping from inside. Doug pounded on the door. No answer. He pounded again, louder. Finally, the door swung open. A man in his mid-30s stood there, shirtless, tattoos covering his arms, eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Warner McCormick, presumably. "What?" he growled. "I'm Douglas Ellison. Where's Renee?" Warner's expression shifted from irritation to something that might have been fear before settling on false bravado. "She's busy. Who the hell are you?" "The father of the child you left at school for 3 hours. Where is Renee?" "Renee!" Warner called over his shoulder. "Some guys hear about the kid." A woman emerged from the back, and Doug barely recognized her. Renee had been vibrant 7 years ago, bright-eyed, ambitious, studying to be a nurse. The woman before him was hollow-cheeked, with lank hair and the telltale signs of serious drug use. She blinked at Doug, and he saw the moment recognition hit. "Doug?" Her voice was raspy. "What are you doing here?" "What am I—" He fought to keep his voice level. "Renee, I have a daughter. You never thought to mention that?" She had the grace to look away. "You weren't supposed to find out. The school called me. I'm listed as emergency contact. Clara's been waiting there for hours." "Oh, shit." Renee glanced at Warner, who'd moved behind her, proprietary hand on her shoulder. "We lost track of time. We were high?" Doug finished coldly. "Gambling? Sleeping off whatever you took last night? Choose your excuse." "You don't understand," Renee started, but Warner cut her off. "We don't owe you explanations, man. Renee's got custody. The kid's fine. Maybe if you'd stuck around, I didn't know." Doug stepped closer, and Warner actually retreated. "She disappeared, changed her number, vanished. And now I find out she's been raising my daughter in this—" He gestured at the apartment, where he could see dirty dishes piled high, empty bottles scattered, general chaos. "Tell me something, Renee. Have you been collecting benefits, child support, welfare, all in my name?" Her silence was answer enough. "I could have you arrested for fraud," Doug said quietly. "For identity theft, for child neglect. The principal is making a CPS report right now." "You can't take her," Renee said suddenly, desperately. "She's my daughter. Our daughter, and yes, I can, I will." Doug pulled out his phone, photographing the apartment's condition. Warner lunged forward, but Doug had already stepped back. "Delete that." "Make me." Doug met his eyes. "Touch me, and I'll have you arrested for assault. You've already got priors, don't you? I can see it in your face." Warner's expression darkened with genuine menace. "You don't want to fuck with me, rich boy." "No, Warner, you don't want to fuck with me." Doug smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "Because I've got resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, private investigators, money, and now I've got motivation. You've been hurting my daughter. That was your first mistake. Threatening me was your second." He turned to Renee, whose eyes were wet with tears, probably withdrawal, not remorse. "You'll hear from my attorney. And Renee, if you actually gave a damn about Clara, you'd let her go willingly. But we both know you don't care about her. You just care about losing your meal ticket." Doug left them standing there, Warner's curses following him down the stairs. When he reached the car, Louise looked at him with concern. "You okay?" "No." Doug looked at Clara, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the war that had just been declared. "But I will be. Once I get her somewhere safe and make those bastards pay for what they've done." He didn't know it yet, but Warner McCormick had $15,000 in gambling debts to some very dangerous people. Didn't know that Renee was supplementing her welfare checks by stealing prescription pads from the hospital where she'd once dreamed of nursing. Didn't know the full extent of their criminal network. But Doug was smart, methodical, and now thoroughly motivated. He'd uncover everything, and when he did, he wouldn't just win custody. He'd destroy them. Chapter 3. Building the Case. Morris Durham sat across from Doug in his law office the next morning, reviewing the paternity test Doug had expedited for $500 in same-day results. Clara was at Louise's house, finally bathed and in clean clothes, sleeping in a real bed for what his sister suspected was the first time in months. "It's a match," Morris confirmed. 99.9% probability. "She's yours, Doug, legally and biologically." He leaned back in his chair, a heavy-set man in his early 50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for winning ugly custody battles. "Now, let's talk about what we're dealing with." Doug had barely slept, spending the night researching Renee May and Warner McCormick. What he'd found made his blood boil. "Renee's been collecting state benefits for 6 years, Doug began. "Welfare, food stamps, Medicaid, all claiming she's a single mother with no child support. But she listed me on Clara's birth certificate and school paperwork. She's been using my identity without my knowledge or consent." "That's identity fraud and welfare fraud," Morris noted, taking meticulous notes. "Federal and state charges. Continue. Warner McCormick, he's got a record: petty theft, assault, drug possession. He's currently wanted for missing a court date on a DUI from 3 months ago." Doug slid a folder across the desk. "But here's where it gets interesting. I hired a private investigator last night." "That was fast." "I'm motivated." Doug's jaw tightened. "Warner owes 15 grand to a loan shark named Shelby Palmer. He borrowed it 6 months ago for gambling debts. He's been making payments by dealing pills on the side. Oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, prescription stuff. And where's he getting the pills?" Doug's eyes went cold. "Renee. She works part-time as a medical assistant at Riverside Clinic. She's been stealing prescription pads and pills for months. The clinic hasn't noticed yet because she's careful, rotating doctor's pads, taking small quantities. But my investigator, Carrie Frazier, got photos, documented dates and times." Morris whistled low. "You've been busy. I'm just getting started." Doug opened another folder. "Here's where I need your legal expertise. I want emergency custody of Clara, today. And I want charges filed against both Renee and Warner for everything they've done." "Emergency custody is possible given the neglect report from the school, but..." "But?" Morris chose his words carefully. "Doug, you're asking for total nuclear war here. If we move forward with fraud charges, drug charges, theft charges against Clara's mother, we're not just winning custody. We're putting her in prison, potentially for years." "Good. Think about how Clara will process that." Doug had thought about little else. "Morris, my daughter is 6 years old. She weighs 42 pounds, underweight for her age. She has bruises on her arms from being grabbed too hard. She told Louise this morning that sometimes she goes to bed hungry because Mommy and Uncle Warner need the food money more. She's been sleeping in a closet because they turned her bedroom into Warner's office, which is apparently where he counts money and packages pills." His voice cracked. "She thought I abandoned her. She's been living in hell while they collected money in my name and fed their addictions. So no, I don't feel bad about putting them in prison. I feel bad I didn't know soon enough to stop it years ago." Morris nodded slowly. "All right, let's do this the right way. First, emergency custody hearing. I can get us in front of Judge Hodge this afternoon. She's tough but fair, and she has zero tolerance for child neglect. Second, we compile everything for the DA. The fraud evidence, the drug evidence, all of it. Third, we document everything Clara says and does. Medical exams, psychological evaluations, the works. We build an airtight case. What about Warner's loan shark connection? Can we use that?" Morris smiled grimly. "Now you're thinking like a chess player. If Warner's desperate enough, he might make mistakes. Desperate people do stupid things. I'm counting on it." They spent 3 hours preparing documents. At 2 p.m., Doug walked into family court with Morris at his side, armed with the paternity test, photographs of the apartment, Principal Jarvis's statement, and medical records showing Clara's malnutrition and injuries. Judge Hodge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened to their petition with increasing disgust. When Renee stumbled in 15 minutes late, clearly hungover, the judge's expression could have frozen fire. "Ms. May, you left your 6-year-old daughter at school for 3 hours?" I lost track of time, Your Honor. It won't happen again. You're right. It won't. Judge Hodge reviewed the documents. Mr. Ellison, you're claiming you had no knowledge of this child's existence? None, Your Honor. Ms. May and I dated briefly 7 years ago. She disappeared without explanation. I learned about Clara yesterday when the school called me. And you immediately sought paternity confirmation and are requesting custody? Yes, Your Honor. I have a stable home, steady income as an architect, no criminal record. I want to provide Clara with the safe environment she deserves. Judge Hodge turned to Renee. Ms. May, where is Mr. McCormick? He lives with you and the child, correct? He had work, Your Honor. He had a warrant, the judge corrected coldly, for missing a DUI court date. Bailiff, please make a note. Ms. May, I'm granting Mr. Ellison emergency temporary custody effective immediately. You'll have supervised visitation pending a full custody hearing in 30 days. In the meantime, CPS will conduct a full investigation of your home. Renee's face crumpled. You can't take my baby. I can and I have. You'll be receiving notice of additional hearings regarding suspected welfare fraud and identity theft. This court is adjourned. Doug felt the weight lift from his shoulders. Clara was safe, legally his. But as he left the courthouse, he saw Renee on her phone, speaking urgently. He couldn't hear the words, but her expression was panicked. She was warning Warner. Good. Let them panic. Let them make mistakes. Because Doug's plan was just beginning, and by the time he was finished, Renee and Warner wouldn't just lose Clara. They'd lose everything. Chapter 4. The detective Doug spent the next week transforming his bachelor's life into one that accommodated a traumatized 6-year-old. Louise helped him convert his guest room into a princess-themed sanctuary, complete with a real bed. Clara's reaction to her first night in it had brought tears to both their eyes. He enrolled her in therapy with Dr. Willa Jarvis, no relation to the principal, bought clothes that fit, and learned the peculiar art of braiding hair via YouTube tutorials. But while he built a life for Clara during the day, his nights belonged to revenge. Carrie Fraser, the private investigator he'd hired, was worth every penny of his expensive retainer. The man was in his early 40s, ex-military, with a network of contacts that spanned the city's underground. He sat in Doug's living room now, spreading photos across the coffee table. Warner's in deeper than we thought, Carrie began. The 15 grand to Shelby Palmer? That's just the tip. He's also into Gilbert Savage for another 10,000. Savage runs an underground poker game out of a warehouse in the industrial district. Warner's been trying to win his way out of debt. It's not working. Doug studied the surveillance photos. Warner entering sketchy buildings, meeting with rough-looking characters, always glancing over his shoulder. How long before these guys lose patience? Palmer's already losing it. My source says Warner's missed 2 payments. Palmer's sent Rodrigo Lutz around to deliver messages. Carrie tapped a photo of a heavily tattooed man who looked like he ate nails for breakfast. Lutz is Palmer's enforcer. Warner's terrified of him. Good. Doug leaned forward. What about Renee's pill operation? She's getting bold, or desperate. She hit 3 different doctors' offices last week, stole pads from all of them. She's writing scripts for Warner to fill at different pharmacies across town. They're selling to Savage's poker players and Palmer's contacts. Small-time operation, but consistent. Carrie pulled out another folder. Here's where it gets interesting. The State Pharmacy Board is already investigating unusual patterns at those locations. They just don't know who's behind it yet. Can we help them figure it out? Carrie grinned. Anonymous tip to the right investigator? Consider it done. But Doug, once this train starts moving, it's not stopping. Are you sure you want to go this far? Doug thought of Clara's nightmare last night, how she'd woken up crying, convinced he'd disappeared like her mother always said. Thought of the bruises, the hunger, the closet she'd slept in. I'm sure. Keep digging. I want everything. Bank records, drug deals, who they're selling to, everything. What about custody? The hearing's in 3 weeks. Morris is confident. Clara's therapist is documenting her progress, the trauma she experienced. CPS found the apartment violated 4 health codes. Between that and the fraud charges, Renee's not getting Clara back. Doug's expression hardened. But that's not enough. I want them broken, Carrie. Financially, legally, socially. I want Warner in prison. I want Renee in prison, and I want everyone who helped them to face consequences. You're playing hardball. They played hardball with a 6-year-old. I'm just returning the favor. The next morning, Doug got a call from a detective, Brett Bowen, with the fraud division. Mr. Ellison, we need to discuss Ms. May's benefit claims. You're listed as the father on multiple applications, but she claimed you provided no support. That's fraud, Doug finished. Detective, I had no knowledge of my daughter until 8 days ago. Ms. May hid her pregnancy and used my identity without permission. I have documentation of everything. They met that afternoon. Detective Bowen was young, maybe 30, with the eager energy of someone who'd recently been promoted. Doug laid out his evidence methodically: the paternity test, the timeline of Renee's disappearance, the welfare applications filed in his name. This is substantial, Bowen admitted. We can definitely pursue charges. But Mr. Ellison, I have to ask, why now? Why not let CPS handle it? Because CPS will investigate and probably close the case with a warning. I want consequences. Real consequences. Doug met the detective's eyes. She stole 6 years from my daughter. 6 years Clara could have had a stable home, food security, safety. Instead, she had neglect and abuse so her mother could feed a drug habit. I want justice. Bowen nodded slowly. I'll start the paperwork. Fair warning, cases like this can take months. I can wait. I'm patient. Doug smiled thinly. But Warner McCormick isn't, and that's going to be his downfall. Chapter 5. The Trap. 2 weeks after gaining custody, Doug invited his sister over for what he called a strategic session. Clara was asleep upstairs, finally gaining weight, slowly learning to trust that food would always be available, that bedtime wasn't negotiable, that adults could be reliable. You're scheming, Louise said, accepting a glass of wine. I know that look. Carrie found something interesting, Doug admitted. Warner's been asking around about selling information, specifically about Savage's poker operation. He's desperate enough that he's considering turning informant. That seems smart, actually. Trade information for debt forgiveness? It would be, except Savage has people everywhere. The moment Warner tries it, he's a dead man. Or worse, badly beaten as a warning. Doug pulled up texts on his phone. So I'm offering Warner a different option. Louise read the messages, her eyes widening. You created a fake identity? Carrie did. Meet Craig Daniel, a businessman with gambling connections looking to break into Savage's network. I've been chatting with Warner through encrypted apps, building trust. Tonight I'm offering him $20,000 for an introduction to Savage. Doug, that's insane. These are dangerous people. Which is why Carrie will be there, wired and armed, along with Detective Bowen and 2 undercover cops. Warner thinks he's setting up a naive businessman. He's actually walking into a sting operation. And if it goes wrong? Doug's expression was cold. Then Warner learns the hard way not to threaten men with resources. The meeting was set for midnight at an abandoned warehouse. Appropriately cinematic, Doug thought with dark humor. He wore a wire under an expensive suit, playing the part of a trust fund gambler looking for excitement. Warner arrived 15 minutes late, jumpy and aggressive. You got the money? Doug showed him a briefcase full of cash, bait provided by the police department. $20,000 as promised. You introduce me to Savage, I'm in his game, you get your money. Simple. And you forget where you heard about the game. Naturally. I'm a businessman, Warner. I understand discretion. Warner grabbed the briefcase and Doug caught Carrie's signal from his hidden position. Not yet. They needed Warner to make the introduction first, needed evidence of the illegal gambling operation. Savage is inside, Warner said, jerking his head toward the warehouse. But fair warning, he's not patient with people who waste his time. They walked into the warehouse, where a poker game was indeed in progress. 6 men around a table, cash piled high, bottles of expensive liquor scattered about. Gilbert Savage sat at the head, a man in his 50s with dead eyes and an aura of casual violence. Savage, "This is Craig Daniel," Warner announced. "The businessman I told you about. He wants in." Savage studied Doug with the assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "Warner says you have money and no sense. That true?" "I have money," Doug agreed smoothly. "Whether I have sense, you'll have to determine. I'm looking for a game with real stakes. Got bored with legal casinos. Buy-in is 50 grand. Not tonight. Tonight I'm just watching, getting a feel for the operation. If I like what I see, I'll bring real money next time." Savage laughed. "Ballsy. All right, Warner, he can stay. But you owe me 10 grand by Friday, or Lutz pays you another visit. And this time, he's bringing bolt cutters." Warner's face paled. "I'll have it. I just need Friday." That's when Doug gave the signal. The warehouse doors burst open. "Police! Nobody move!" Chaos erupted. Savage went for a gun, but Detective Bowen was faster. Cards and money scattered as men tried to flee, running straight into officers stationed at every exit. Warner stood frozen, comprehension dawning too slowly on his face. You set me up," he breathed, staring at Doug. "I believe the phrase is played you like a fiddle." Doug ripped off the wire. "How does it feel, Warner? Being betrayed by someone you thought you could use?" "You son of a—" Carey appeared, restraining Warner before he could finish. "Careful. Assaulting a witness gets you extra years." By the time the arrests were processed, they had Savage for running an illegal gambling operation, possession of illegal firearms, and money laundering. His associates faced similar charges. Warner was arrested for drug trafficking, assault charges from the priors they'd researched, and conspiracy. But Doug wasn't finished. Chapter 6. The Prescription. While Warner sat in jail unable to make bail, his debts ensuring no one would help him, Renee became Doug's next target. But he didn't have to do much. The pharmaceutical board investigation that Carey had tipped off was moving faster than expected. Dr. Shelby Palmer, no relation to the loan shark, called Doug personally. "Mr. Ellison, I'm with the State Pharmacy Board. We're investigating prescription fraud, and your daughter's mother's name has come up repeatedly. We understand you have custody?" "I do. What do you need?" "Any documentation of her drug use, her employment at Riverside, clinic, anything that might support our investigation." Doug provided everything. Clara's statements about pills in the house, photos of the apartment with visible medications, timestamps of Renee's work schedule cross-referenced with suspicious prescriptions. The board moved swiftly. 3 days later, Renee was arrested at the clinic. The raid found stolen prescription pads in her locker, unregistered medications, and evidence she'd been forging doctors' signatures for months. The clinic administrator, horrified at the liability, immediately fired her and cooperated fully with investigators. Doug watched the news coverage from his living room, Clara playing with blocks nearby. She'd asked about her mother once. "When is Mommy coming back?" And Doug had answered carefully, "Your mommy made some bad choices. She's going to be away for a while, getting help, but you're safe here with me." Clara had considered this, then asked if they could have spaghetti for dinner. Children were resilient in ways that broke and inspired him. His phone rang. "Morris. The custody hearing is tomorrow," his lawyer said. "But given recent developments, I don't think Renee will even show. Her public defender is advising her to focus on the criminal charges. She's looking at 10 years minimum between the fraud, theft, and drug charges." "Good. Doug, I have to ask, did you orchestrate all of this? The gambling sting, the pharmacy investigation, all of it?" Doug was quiet for a moment. "I provided information to the proper authorities. What they did with it was their decision. I just wanted my daughter safe, and the people who hurt her to face consequences." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Morris laughed. "Fair enough. See you in court tomorrow. Bring Clara. The judge will want to see how she's adjusting." The custody hearing was anticlimactic. Renee didn't appear. The judge reviewed Clara's therapy reports, her medical improvements, Doug's financial stability, and CPS's glowing evaluation of his home. The emergency custody became permanent. Doug was granted full legal and physical custody, with Renee's parental rights suspended pending her criminal proceedings. As they left the courthouse, Clara held Doug's hand tightly. "Does this mean I get to stay with you forever?" Doug knelt to her level. This child who'd walked into his life like a storm and changed everything. "Forever. You're my daughter. You're safe. And no one will ever hurt you or forget you again." She hugged him with the fierce grip of someone who'd lost too much and finally found home. But in the back of Doug's mind, he was already planning the final act. Because Warner and Renee weren't the only ones who'd failed Clara. There were others, the caseworkers who'd missed signs, the neighbors who'd heard but not reported, the system that had let a child fall through the cracks. He couldn't punish them all, but he could make sure it never happened again. Chapter 7. Exposure. With custody secured and criminal charges filed, Doug turned his attention to the broader picture. Warner and Renee would spend years in prison. Warner took a plea deal for 8 years after evidence of his drug trafficking proved overwhelming. Renee, refusing to admit fault, went to trial and received 12 years. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But Doug wanted more than justice. He wanted change. He started with the welfare office. Using his documentation of the fraud, he filed a civil suit against the state for negligence in failing to verify Renee's claims. The lawsuit alleged systemic failures that had enabled identity theft and child neglect. The local media picked up the story. "Single father discovers daughter after 6 years of welfare fraud," ran the headline. Doug gave carefully controlled interviews, showing Clara's progress, explaining the system's failures without exploiting his daughter's trauma. He was articulate, sympathetic, and relentless. The welfare commissioner, Eddie McCall, called him personally. "Mr. Ellison, this lawsuit is going to cost the state millions." "Good. Maybe that will motivate reforms. How many other Renee Mays are out there, Commissioner? How many kids are suffering while fraudulent claims go unverified?" "We process thousands of claims monthly. We can't verify every—" "Then hire more people. Create better systems. Do your job." Doug's voice was steel. "Because if you don't, I'm going to make this lawsuit my full-time job, and I have excellent lawyers." The state settled 6 months later. $5 million. Doug immediately established the Clara Ellison Foundation, dedicated to supporting children in neglectful situations and reforming welfare verification processes. The publicity forced systemic reviews across multiple agencies. But his most satisfying revenge came from an unexpected place. Chapter 8. The Loan Shark's Interest. Shelby Palmer, the loan shark Warner had borrowed from, was a practical man. When his debtor got arrested and his money disappeared into legal fees, Palmer wrote it off as a loss. But then he read the news stories about Douglas Ellison, the architect who'd orchestrated the downfall of multiple criminal operations, who'd played Warner like a violin. Palmer respected competence. He showed up at Doug's office on a Tuesday morning, walking past the receptionist with the confidence of someone who knew she wouldn't stop him. Doug looked up from his blueprints to find a well-dressed man in his 50s settling into the chair across from his desk. "Mr. Ellison, I'm Shelby Palmer." Doug's hand moved toward his desk drawer, where he now kept pepper spray, a gift from Carrie after the warehouse incident. "I know who you are. What do you want?" "To thank you." Palmer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Warner McCormick owed me $15,000. I'd resigned myself to never seeing it. But you destroyed him so thoroughly that his lawyer contacted me about seizing assets. I recovered $12,000 from the sale of the possessions he and Ms. May accumulated. Not bad. I didn't do it for you. I know. You did it for your daughter, which is why I respect it." Palmer leaned forward. "Men like you and me, Mr. Ellison, we understand leverage. We understand that the world is vicious, and sometimes you have to be more vicious to protect what's yours. Warner thought he could play games with dangerous people. You showed him what real danger looks like. If this is a recruitment pitch, it's not. I have no interest in architects." Palmer stood. "I came to tell you that your debt to me, the hypothetical one that might have existed if our operations had intersected, is cleared. You kept Warner from talking to the police about my business. His arrest on drug charges silenced him effectively. For that, you have my gratitude." I don't want your gratitude. Then take my respect. Palmer headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. Warner's been having a difficult time in prison. Savage's associates are inside. They're not pleased that his cooperation led to longer sentences. I'd estimate Warner has another 6 months before something unfortunate happens. Doug should have felt guilty, should have felt something other than cold satisfaction. That's not my concern. No, it's not. Palmer nodded once and left. Doug sat in the silence after, thinking about morality and justice and revenge. He'd crossed lines he'd never imagined crossing. He'd manipulated people, orchestrated arrests, used the system as a weapon, and he'd do it all again without hesitation. Because Clara was thriving. She'd gained 12 pounds. She laughed now, a sound that lit up his world. She called him Daddy without hesitation. Her nightmares were decreasing. She was safe. That was all that mattered. Chapter 9. The Future. 2 years after that phone call from Riverside Elementary, Doug stood in the backyard of his new house, larger, with a swing set and a tree house he'd built himself. Clara's 8th birthday party was in full swing, children running wild, Louise managing the chaos with the skill of an experienced aunt. Morris approached with a beer. Heard from your lawyer yesterday. Renee's parole hearing is coming up. She won't get it. Doug watched Clara chase her friends, healthy and happy and everything a child should be. 8 years minimum on the fraud charges, and she's shown no remorse. The board won't risk it. And if they do, then I'll fight it. But she has no claim to Clara anymore. Parental rights were terminated completely last year. Clara's legally and permanently mine. She still asks about her mother? Sometimes. Less now. Doug took a drink. Her therapist says it's natural. Renee's her biological mother, regardless of everything else. But Clara knows she's safe here. That's what matters. Louise brought over a piece of cake, settling beside them. She's amazing, Doug. You've done an incredible job. We've done an incredible job. I couldn't have managed this without you. So, what's next? Another crusade for justice? Doug smiled. Actually, I'm thinking about running for city council. There are a lot of kids like Clara out there. A lot of systemic failures. If I have a platform, maybe I can fix more than just one case. Politics, Morris groaned. Doug, you'll hate it. Probably, but I'm good at it. Manipulating systems, leveraging pressure, forcing change. Might as well use those skills legally. He watched Clara blow out candles, surrounded by friends. She deserves a world where what happened to her can't happen to other kids. If I can help build that, I will. That evening, after the party ended and Clara was asleep upstairs, Doug stood in her doorway, watching her breathe. She clutched her old stuffed rabbit. He'd tried to replace it with newer toys, but she refused. The rabbit had been with her through everything. It stayed. His phone buzzed. A text from Carrie. Warner was stabbed in prison yesterday. Survived, but barely. Thought you'd want to know. Doug stared at the message, waiting for guilt that didn't come. Warner had made his choices. He'd hurt a child, enabled abuse, threatened Doug's family. Whatever happened to him now was consequence, not tragedy. He deleted the message and returned to watching Clara sleep. 2 years ago, a phone call had shattered his simple life. He'd discovered he was a father, that someone had stolen years from him, that a child had suffered because of lies and neglect. He could have walked away, taken custody quietly, let the system handle the rest, moved on. But Douglas Ellison wasn't a man who walked away. He was a man who solved problems, who dismantled obstacles, who protected what was his with ruthless efficiency. He'd destroyed the people who hurt his daughter. He'd rebuilt her life. He'd changed systems. And he'd do it all again without hesitation. Because that little girl sleeping peacefully upstairs was worth every manipulation, every scheme, every line he'd crossed. She was his daughter. His storm cloud-eyed, resilient, beautiful daughter. And no one would ever hurt her again.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.